For those guests that are a part of our Zoom tonight, this is very special, and we're honored to have you joining us. I met our guest speaker about a year and a half ago, and he has become not only a mentor, a friend, somebody that I can count on. Dr. Lee Ostler graduated from the University of Washington Dental School. He practices in beautiful Richland, Washington. He founded and operated an educational company teaching health, wellness to professionals. He is the founder and program chair for the Medical Dental Summit, an annual gathering of physicians. And I've just seen recently where he's been promoted. He's been around the country, internationally as well, speaking on behalf of his practice, his profession, and always having time to talk about these amazing molecules. He's the one that wrote the book. The next one is Healthy Matters, also, and as you can see, applying the Redox lifestyle. And then one that was about a year ago is Why It Matters.
It's fun to speak to your group. It's a great pleasure. That's one of the nice things I really like about this venture that we're in is everybody scratches each other's back. It's a cross supportive. It's a family, and that's a really good feeling. So, yeah, this goes back a ways. I didn't even know this was on the radar screen. I'd spent 10, 15 years prior to that studying, researching, in PubMed and doing oral systemic, which is the mouth-body connection, linkages, and writing some books for physicians and whatnot. And then my wife's physician, one day, she's had a lot of health issues, and he suggested that we try Redox Signaling Molecules. And I distinctly remember asking him, well, what is that? And he goes, just go Google it and get some. And yeah, but what is that? And he said, just go Google it and get some. He said it twice. And I figured that was all I was going to get out of him. And I wasn't quite sure why at the moment, but I went and did that. I found a source. We got some. And, for my wife, it was a different experience for her than what most of us experienced. For her, it was like flipping a switch. Within 48 hours, it was like she came alive. And that really got my attention. It's like I'm one of those brain damaged people that needs to know the why of everything. Like, how did this really work? And so that really propelled me into the science to try and figure out, what is this redox thing? And it's captured my love. It's captured my attention. This is the science for how our cells work. And when you know how your cells work, when you know the rules of the cell, you can design your life around that, because nothing happens in a health manner unless you're minding the rules of your cell. And it's exciting science. It's the future of nearly everything anti-aging, at least in concept, going forward, and even in big pharma. And they will be taking advantage of some of the science for sure. But so that was a real quick, entrance. A couple of years later, during when COVID hit, I decided to have some of my own back issues looked at. I figured if I had a couple of months off and nobody's practicing, I might as well take care of number one here. So I was having a lot of discomfort, a lot of back discomfort. It was not fun, and I had a lot of numbness. And so anyway, the long story short there is surgery did not happen. I was kind of anticipating it because the surgeon was having his own hip replaced during that time, and so he wasn't going to do anything. But he said if he did anything with me, he would fuse several levels and I wouldn't go back to work, so I wouldn't be able to bend over. So anyway, I thought, well, that's a no-go. So I doubled my doses of ASEA for myself. And within about 5 days, probably 99% of all of my back discomfort and all the paresthesia and the tingling and the numbness, it's just gone. It's been gone since. I don't think it roto-rooted out the stenosis, but it certainly has dealt with the inflammation. And so I've been really grateful for that. I think the good place to start with that is to ask a question, and that is, well, how does, because we have environmental and physiological stress, metabolic stress around us, in us all the time. But the question is, how does the body sense or detect when it's in trouble? What does it do when it recognizes that it's in trouble? And how does it facilitate a response, right? So that's the fundamental question, is how do I know I'm in trouble? And speaking of the cell, how does the cell know it's under stress, and what does it do about it? And so the science side of that is there's a special mechanism that is, it's like gravity. You know, this is a rule of the universe, that when the cell becomes stressed, and I'm going to define that as to be oxidized. When we speak of stress, we're not talking about emotional, you know, I had a bad day today type of thing. We're talking about physiological stress, which is oxidation. And just a quick aside, you know, oxidation, if you can think of an atom that has, you know, a center neutron, proton, and then it has electrons orbiting around it, kind of like planets that orbit the sun, right? They're in an orbit. And when a number of electrons and the charge on the proton are equal, the positive and the negative charges balance each other, and I'm in a low energy state. But when an atom or a molecule becomes oxidized, it means it's lost an electron, which means I'm missing a planet. You know, one of the orbits isn't completely filled, and it makes for a reactive or unstable atom or molecule. And so because it's unstable, because it's oxidized, it wants to go out and steal an electron from anywhere it can get it, whether it's an adjacent protein or DNA molecule or, you know, a membrane or wherever. It just wants to satisfy its own energy requirement to become more stable. There's a physiologist once that said that life is nothing more than electrons looking for a place to rest. Everything wants to be low energy. And when I have a high reactive atom or molecule, it's in a state of oxidation, and that's stressful to the cell, because what that molecule will do is it will go steal an electron, which then in turn makes the molecule it took the electron from itself unstable. And so now it's looking for an electron, and we call these free radicals. We call this oxidative damage. And this has been the theory for the last, you know, several decades, is that this is what causes disease and inflammation are these unstable, highly reactive oxidants that are looking for electrons to steal. And so we have developed, you know, an antioxidant industry for the last several decades to take vitamins and antioxidants to come in and donate electrons, spare electrons, so that we can satisfy this high energy state, so it'll make them low so that they'll quit doing damage. And we call that putting out the fire, putting out the oxidative fire, as it were. So that is the physiological state that is occurring inside the cell that we call stress or oxidative stress. And that state or condition or situation is what we're referring to when we say, how does the cell know that that's going on? How does it detect that? And that's these switches. We call them transcription factors, but you can just think of it as a switch. And so a great analogy for this that I like to use is you're sitting there in your room and you look over at the wall and you can see a thermostat, you know, on the wall of your home. And that thermostat has been pre-programmed to be at a certain set point. And when the ambient temperature condition in your room is, you know, at that set point, you're in balance, you're in homeostasis. But if the temperature were to drop, or if it were to raise above or below that set point, there's a mechanism inside the thermostat that relays on, it kicks on, and it turns on a process. There's a machine behind the wall that starts to throw warm or cold air into the room to condition or warm it so that it can get back to the set point where you're in balance again, and then it turns off. And we call that response. It's responsive. And so inside the cell, we have the same kind of there's an analogy or metaphor there to that we have a switch. They're called transcription factors. They sense or detect when this stress occurs so that it can turn on, switch on, and put in motion a process, a machine, if you will, that will bring antioxidants, create antioxidants, and bring them back into the cell to reduce or to calm or to balance this stressful state inside the cell so that we don't get inflammation and we don't get sickness or disease. And so real simply put, you can just think of this redox switch. Redox stands for reduction oxidation. I'm just moving electrons from one molecule to the next. So it's a switch or a designed mechanism that senses a problem, turns on a process to correct it, and then turns it off after it's corrected. That's what's innate. That's what's built in to us. So that's what we mean by having the switch. And it's all about what we call the redox state or the oxidation state. A lot of these are synonyms that scientists just make up big words, and they make 20 of them to say the same thing. But, it's a state of oxidation. And if I have a highly energetic state of oxidation, then it will favor inflammation. It will favor disease processes, and we don't want that. The Medical Professionals Board is an assemblage of a dozen and a half health professionals from a variety of different walks, and we have the distinct honor and privilege to sit and counsel with each other. Periodically, we do fly in and have face-to-face meetings with the corporate team and the scientists, and we're also part of helping to, at a minimum, give feedback, if not provide some serious suggestions as to the things to be looking for in terms of some of these studies that are being commissioned that are international and even here stateside. So, that's ongoing. Because of the kind of company that we are with the technology that we have and the patents and the trade secrets, it's really hard. It's a difficult proposition to just throw this out into the I'll call it the public research community and say, well, here's everything that we have, pick it over, because you would quickly lose your Colonel Sanders secret recipe, right? And it wouldn't work well for the business. And so we've commissioned these. Some of them are in-house, but now more and more are starting to be third-party independent investigators who are beginning to look at some of these different science things. One of them, as you mentioned, is called NRF2. That's a good question. That the previous question you asked and the whole idea of redox switches is a good setup for that, as it turns out. NRF2 is the acronym that stands for the transcription factor that is associated with the antioxidant cell protection inside the cell. So the very process we were just describing about how does a cell sense or detect it's in trouble, and how does it signal for a response, and then how does it turn off, that whole process is the NRF2 transcription factor. That's the name of this switch. Now, the point of this is that the switch itself, NRF2, is everything's proteins. Everything that our DNA does is about making proteins. And the reason why the oxidation matters is because on these proteins, there are amino acids that have electrical charges. We call them electrostatic charges. It's just like if you took a balloon and rubbed it in your hair and you can stick it against the wall, because the electrostatic charges will bond the two together, and you'll have the balloon that will now hang on the wall because you created an energy current in there called electrostatic charge. And that's one of those laws of physics, right? And think of two north poles of the magnet. You can't push them together. They repel each other. But if I had a north and a south pole, and I could bring them together, they snap together because they attract each other. Well, the same thing holds true for positive and negative electrical charges. If I have a positive charged molecule and a negative charged molecule, they're attracted to each other. So if you have this a long spaghetti strand protein, and it has electrical charges all the way down the spaghetti strand, as it were, and you did that, and you kind of tossed this loose spaghetti strand in the air, it would fold on itself with positive and negative attraction, and it would create a shape. We call that folding the protein. Well, that folding of the protein is what gives the protein its function. That's what makes it work in the body, is that because of the code and where those charges are, it will assume a shape, and that's what gives it function. So NRF2 is a protein, and it's held tightly or bonded or bound through electrostatic charges to another molecule. We call it KEAP1, KEAP1. So it's what we call a dimer. It's two proteins held together. And when we have, and they're held together, and the NRF2 transcription factor is thus inactive. It's not turned on. It's held immobile. It's sequestered. It's kept in place. But when the environment that this transcription factor is in the cell, when it becomes oxidized and these electrons start to move, it changes the charges on the inhibitor protein such that it changes its shape and releases the NRF2 molecule protein to go to the DNA to turn on the machine. That's the switch. And because we know that, then we can say, well, we can go in and manipulate this. We can hack. We can on purpose change the oxidative state of the cell to make this release so that we can activate or turn on the transcription factor, so that this protein will go to the DNA and turn on the machine that makes glutathione and that makes autophagy or cell renewal happen. It makes the mitochondria reproduce. All the good things that are associated with longevity and health are activated when we turn on the switch and we activate the NRF2 pathway. So, and then back to my point of the switch turning off, it's like when the glutathione and the correction, occurs, and I rebalance the cell, then these two bond back together because it's not oxidized anymore, and it stops the process. So I can't go turn on the DNA to make the protein anymore. That's a really important principle, because this is an on-off switch that is responsive. It's an adaptive process that knows when to stop. And this is a subtle thing, because out in the world, there's a lot of competition out there that says, well, if you take all of our vitamins and you take this handful of antioxidants, it will make you healthy. And the problem with that is that it's top loading. It doesn't know when to turn off the process. You're just reducing the cellular environment, and it can create its own set of problems. So we like this idea that we have a responsive, adaptive, turn on, turn off capability, because that's how the body was designed to work. So this is a real pure science. It's not, and I'm not saying that, I'm not throwing anything else under the bus and saying it's wrong, to do other things. You still need your nutrients, right? But we're not top loading. We're doing this is bioidentical with how the cell works. So that's what NRF2 means. And the whole deal out there in the research is we're trying to ask the question is, can we do something, which is a C, can we do something that will activate this switch, that will create a situation where I can release it and turn it on, so I can upregulate or activate the switch that makes all this healthy stuff, all these healthy gene pathways start working, so that all this correction can come back in and reset, rejuvenate, restore, replenish, refresh, repair. All these words will start happening if I activate these pathway genes. That's the key.
Why is it that ASEA Redox is a supplement and not a pharmaceutical?
Well, our disclaimer is because we are a supplement, we don't treat, diagnose, or cure anything. This is a supplement. And the reason why it's not a drug is because it could not kill anything. In order to be a drug, whatever agent you're developing to be a drug has to go through a test called the lethal dose 50. You need an LD50 certificate in order to continue your drug investigation to develop a drug. What that means is that whatever this is that you're testing, you keep increasing the dose in laboratory animals until 50% of them perish. And then you know the dose at which 50% of your sample, your lab rats, whatever, will die. Well, when they did that with ASEA, nothing died. They just got healthy. And so the financial backers that were behind this, it was going to be a drug. They were courting and looking for big pharma to come in, and they were going to flip it and take their windfall and go on to the next biotech research project. That's the way they operate. But they were kind of dead in the water. The financial backers left, and our founder, Vertus Norton, was a part of that group. He'd been invited in to help him secure the funding, and he basically kind of said, "You're dead in the water, barking up the wrong tree. But I think you've got something here. It's just not going to be a drug." And so he had some laboratory, background experience himself. And they went to the FDA and flipped this to the supplement side of the FDA, which means you have different rules, which is why we can't make claims and we can't talk about diseases and curing and those kind of things. It's a supplement, but they didn't really know what to do with it because it's not vitamins. There's no nutrition in this, and that typically is what defines supplements is biomolecules that are nutritional in nature. These are signaling molecules. And so this really does kind of, even though it's not designated as such, it really creates a new category in the arena of whatever you want to call it, alternative health, or, it's kind of a new nuance because no one else knows what to do with this. And you still need to take your nutrition. So that's in the long and short of it. That's why we are a supplement. And it turned out to be the right move, and mostly because this is so universal. Every cell in the body, this isn't specific to a specific, organ or a specific type of cell or a disease or a illness or, a condition. It's every cell in the body is affected by cell signaling. Every cell has mitochondria in it. That's really kind of the heart of this whole thing is the mitochondria. So, I hope that addressed your question.
It does. And as I listen to you, and obviously we're friends as well, and you have been a part of ASEA longer than anyone else on this call. And just the short time that some of us have been, it's amazing every day. Phone calls, texts, emails, crying testimonials of getting their lives back. How has that been? Has that been one of the most unbelievable blessings for you in your lifetime and on your journey?
Yeah, it is, and for me, it's especially fun because I know why it works. It's not some magical, mystical folk medicine, alternative kind of thing. This is how the cells were designed to work. And in my view, we have the most pure, the most complete, the most upstream. I put on the back of the first book, the statement, these are the deepest cell signaling molecules ever discovered. This is how the cell works. And when you know that, and then you hear all these stories and your friends, as I related my own spouse and myself, and I have family members with some rather serious mental health challenges, and you watch how this helps them in their recovery and their stability, and it's like you can't trade that for anything. It's like it's amazing. I can only treat so many people, hands-on, but my goal is to one day be able to say, well, I've got 10,000 or 1,000 or 1,000,000, people that have somehow, benefited just simply because I took my own physician's advice one day and said, just go Google it and get some.
Mm-hmm.
So, who knows?
Yeah, definitely. You mentioned a buzzword, and I'm going to throw another one in there. In today's world, we hear about glutathione. We hear about stem cell or stem cell clinics. Knowing what you know, and obviously you're the expert on here, tell us, how does it affect those two buzzwords that seem, there are people out there that are promoting such. Share with us how Redox actually takes it to a whole new level.
Well, again, this is a fun segue because the whole redox switch transcription factor NRF2 conversation is about creating glutathione. That's the protein that we're trying to create so that the glutathione, acting as the body's master antioxidant and the master detoxifier molecule, so that we have more of that glutathione. If you just went out there and said, my end objective is I want more glutathione, right? That's what we want, is because we're not making so much of it anymore as we get older. But that's what I want. Well, unfortunately, you can't supplement it. It won't survive the gut. And so I have to create it, unless you want to be on a perpetual IV, you have to make it in your own cells. So then the question is, well, how do I get my cells to make more glutathione? And again, you walk backwards in that chain and you go, well, the way to make more glutathione is to have more NRF2 activation, more activity. And the way to make that happen is to have more redox signaling. So it's a linkage. It's a long chain of linked events that at the end gives me more glutathione. So that's the buzz about glutathione, is I'd say at a 99% level, you can't source it externally. You have to make it internally. And the way to do that is to activate NRF2. There is no other way. So anything that gets you there, and lifestyle can help. I mean, everything that we talk about with a redox-based lifestyle is a part of that equation. As it regards to stem cells are kind of like a raw cell. They are an undifferentiated cell, or what we call a pluripotent cell, meaning that one cell can become many depending on what environmental triggers, or conditions cause it to differentiate in different directions. And the conventional medicine, and I'm no expert on obviously on the application of stem cells, but the whole idea is if we can obtain your own stem cells or from a bank, we can go upstream in the cell differentiation pathway, and we can put kind of the raw cells in there, and they will heal. They will do good things for your body. Usually, people are doing them for body parts, like knees or specific areas of the body to regenerate and rejuvenate. We call it regenerative medicine. We're trying to regenerate from having the ill effects of degenerated, tissues. But here's the kicker, and that is that stem cells activate because of redox signaling. Mm. And so if you knew that, you'd say, gee, I could enhance, I could put a floor underneath this. I could strengthen my own ability to differentiate stem cells. For example, if you had an injury, a wound, a burn, a cut, any kind of injury, stem cells are being differentiated to help in the repair process. The leading edge of the wound, as it were, has to be signaled so it knows how to repair the wound, how to clean up the wound. And all of that is cell signaling. It's all redox. It's these electrons moving from one molecule to the next. And that is what we call signal transduction. I'm moving a signal down the wire, as it were, because I want something down at the end, which is the DNA, to do certain things based on its coding. And this is how we tell it what to do. And in that regard, the other buzzword that you didn't bring up, but I'll introduce it here, is called epigenetics. I mean, people, we know about the genome or genetics. The Human Genome Project, 20 years ago was about mapping all the chromosomes so that we knew what all the DNA was about. Well, we're 20 years past that, and everybody thought that we kind of would have fixed everything, because if we can map the genome, why we should be able to figure out health. And turns out that there's an important overlay. When you think of epidermis, your skin, it's the epi is over. So it's the dermis that's over your skin. So the epigenome that's overlaid on top of the genome or the DNA is what tells the DNA what to do. Remember, does that sound familiar? That's our switching. We want to tell the DNA what to do, when to do it, and when not to do it. We call that gene expression and gene silencing. And if I have the power and the capability to epigenetically, or we can think of it as environmentally, because these are signals that come from the cell environment. If I can influence or manipulate or tell the DNA when to turn on and when to turn off, I have a big leg up, in the whole health process, because otherwise I'm just kind of going along as a I don't know, a captive prisoner, of the system, and whatever happens, happens. And this whole idea of hacking or biohacking the cell is, can I do things that purposefully manipulate it? Can I hack it to do good things, to turn these switches on, to make more glutathione, to activate stem cells? And again, there's 10,000 things that are out there. I think of it, the canopy of the tree. There's all kinds of leaves and branches and whatever out there. But the root, the trunk of the tree, the thing that's before all of that occurs is the signaling. That's the master control. That's the epigenetic control over all of our genetic code. And that's what ASEA is a part of, is the ability to hack, turn on, turn off, gene expression, gene silencing. It's this adaptive stress response. And now that we know that, we're minding the rules of the cell, and I can dial in, a better response to stress.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Thank you for that too. Why do some people have fairly quick, visible results of redox and others may take a little longer?
Well, I think a simplistic answer is just to think of it about as a redox deficit. All of us has health history. We have genetic background. We have, past medical issues, current medical issues, different exposures to toxins and radiations in our life. And so we all come at this at the outset with different challenges. And for some people, it requires more support in order to get what you might think is the same response or a desirable response. And I realize that's not fair, but that's just the way it is. It's really no different in medicine when you say, well, if I take one aspirin, it doesn't affect the headache, well, then take two. And if that doesn't work, well, then switch it with some ibuprofen. We're just looking for the result of the headache going away. But in this regard, the other side of the answer is, not to jump in too far deep, but there's a science principle called hormesis, Hormesis. And it simply means that the same stress or stressor in the cell, if it is, and it's oxidation, if I have a high amount of it or a chronic sustained amount of it, I'm actually going to activate a different pathway gene that is related with inflammation. So remember this concept of the switch and the two proteins? There's a different switch called the NF-κB or NF-kappa beta switch. And that's the one associated with inflammation. So when I have elevated high levels or chronic levels of oxidation in the cell, because I'm not managing the environment right, it turns on this switch so that now goes and creates inflammatory proteins. We call those cytokines. And so now I have inflammation and we have disease. And most of the time, healthcare professionals, as well as people, are mostly fixated on the results of inflammation. They're trying to do anti-inflammation. They're coming to try to block that, right? After the fact almost. So the point is if I have high levels of oxidation that I'm not controlling well, I'm activating inflammation. You never have inflammation without high levels or sustained levels of oxidation. However, back to the earlier one, if I have low levels of oxidation, mild or intermittent, every once in a while, random, if I'm challenging the cell, think of your lifestyle. If you periodically challenge your cell with a little stress through exercise or fasting or phytochemicals, if I intermittently produce a mild a mild amount of stress, I'm activating the NRF2, which gives me glutathione and antioxidants. And so I can sit here and I can choose which pathway I want to activate because of this principle of hormesis. Again, that puts me empowered, because if that's true, then I can have a lifestyle that challenges my body with intermittent, random, mild levels of oxidation that come through fasting and exercise and dieting and ketoing and whatever else. I can hack, I can mimic, right? I can epigenetically influence my genes to do what I want them to do, not just what they're doing at random. And so back to your question, people that have different results with this, it may be that they're not taking enough. Everything because of that hormesis, it's not a set point. It's a range, and we all have a different set point, if you will. The thermostat on the wall is a different set point for each of us, and we just need to go find out what our set point is. For my own examples, for 2 years, I was taking 2 ounces twice a day. I was still having back discomfort. I was still having, all the things. My wife had a result in 48 hours. Mine, a week into it, I was thinking clearer, sharper, sleeping better, more energy. And it was kind of like I really wasn't positive. I wasn't sure if it was my own bias wanting this to be this way, placeboing or whatever. But at 2 years into it, when I doubled my dose and all of my discomfort was just gone in 5 days, I realized I had not been sufficiently hitting the set point that I needed for me. And if any time during that first, period of time, if I would have said, yeah, this is fooey, this isn't working for me, I would have missed, because I just hadn't found for me what my dose was, my sweet spot. My wife has a different sweet spot, and we can always tell. Like if she falls off the wagon, it's like, and we go to the doctor and she's complaining, he'll look at her and he'll say, have you been taking your ASEA? And she'll go, no. And so she'll get back on it, because there's a sweet spot that when she's at that dosage for her, it works really nice. And so, it's a dosing, it's a timing, it takes time. This isn't a drug. Your headache's not going to go away in 30 minutes like the pill bottle said. This is cell health, cell function. And sometimes that takes a while to kind of turn that battleship around.
Yeah, I love that you mentioned the word placebo effect. And with the studies that have been coming in and we're privy to, how mice are able to run in that wheel 30% longer than the ones that didn't take ASEA Redox. And the fact of the matter is, mice don't have the capability of placebo, let alone horses, dogs, cats, and the other one. Believe every company rises and falls by its leadership. And I've never been associated with a CEO, a founder, a brilliant individual like Tyler. But he talks about these stages of every company. First, you go through the ridicule stage. Hey, you guys are crazy. You don't know what you're talking about. It's not real. And then you go through the opposition stage, where others kind of know where you're going, but they want to, quote unquote, put it down or, make some claims that aren't true. And then you finally reach the acceptance stage. And here we are 14 years later as a company, 33 countries, soon to add a few more, global distribution. What does it mean to you? And where do you think the next 3, 4, 5 years are going to be like as the world becomes in the acceptance stage?
Well, we're doing as much as we can to try and move the needle and get people's attention, right? And you kind of think about, well, most people haven't even heard of us. But even those who have heard of us, it takes 6 or 7 times of hearing something before most people will make the switch. They're, flip that switch for themselves. So even at that, there's still a lot of ground to plow with regards to, I don't know, getting to first base or whatever. Just starting. We're just in the beginning, right? I would say that we're probably sufficiently through the formulation phase, and we're now just beginning to enter the little curve that starts to go up, and that will last for a long time. But I think that, in my view, and I don't have a crystal ball that can see this in the future, but knowing that they've done studies that show it takes 17 years in healthcare science from something that starts as an idea in somebody's brain or on a lab bench. It takes an average of 17 years for it to move into full clinical acceptance and application. Now, maybe today it's different with, what they call Moore's Law and the internet and whatnot, but still it takes a while. And so my point is that the researchers, the universities in the world that are beginning now to understand redox biochemistry, redox molecular biology, they're starting to realize that they can make drugs. I mean, they're on record. If they can make a drug that will go in and activate that switch with a pill, they can make billions of dollars. And they will do that. I mean, this is coming, and there's a place for it, because there's some really tough switches, that are really hard to access and manipulate, that are associated with some very grave disorders, in the world today. So I'm all for that. But my point in saying that is that as they talk this up, as this research goes out, it's like a rising tide raises all boats. And all of a sudden, this is going to be the thing. Redox is going to be, maybe ASEA will still not have been heard by everybody, but redox will become a big thing, because the anti-aging and the big pharma industry are pushing the research in this direction. This is all about anti-aging. I mean, this is what like metformin, for example, is now looked at as an anti-aging drug, not just a diabetic drug, because of its effect on mitochondria to, in effect, make more redox signaling molecules. It does it indirectly, whereas we do it directly. But still, my point is this is out there, and we're going to be benefited as that whole conversation is elevated by everybody, legitimizing what it is that we're talking about. Well, I think that the thing that kind of lights me up a little bit the most is in thinking about, and I can't say too much here, but is thinking about the impact that this has on inflammation. Because in the world out there, it's all about inflammation. Everything is inflammation. And we haven't really talked about that too much, but I can promise you we are sitting at the heart of that conversation, because we're so far upstream in that chain we talked about earlier. And healthcare is kind of downstream, looking for anti-inflammatory things. And that's all good. I mean, this is a big ship. There's a lot of room on it, because there's a lot of people that have issues. But conceptually, to move upstream, what would we say to create a situation where you have non-inflammation? This isn't anti-inflammatory, it's like no inflammatory, right? We stopped it at the oxidative level before it even did that. Now, that is not said categorically, because inflammation is an important part of our innate immune system. We would be dead if we didn't have some inflammation. That's how the body mediates healing in some regards. Is that it's what tells cells where to move when we're healing and recovering. But the kind of inflammation we're referencing here is the chronic, the kind of stuff that's related to non-communicable, chronic degenerative disease that is responsible for 75 to 80% of our health dollars and expenses and misery. But all of that is exciting. And the other part is I just like talking about the lifestyle side of it. This is something that none of us are perfect at. But everything that you can do from a lifestyle point of view works because of redox principles. You are redox centric when you are doing those things, such as fasting or ketoing or exercising or stress reducing or sleeping better, whatever. It's you don't get well unless you activate redox pathways.
Well, Dr. Lee, it has been an extreme honor, a privilege to have you join us. I know everybody is applauding. Most of us are sitting down, but a standing ovation is definitely going around all around the country right now. Thank you for that. Thank you for your service on the Medical Advisory Board. And if there's anything that we can do to help support you, we want to reciprocate, do that, always be a part of your life with this ASEA journey. Denise has again put your books, the links. We have all of them at our household. And such an honor to have you. And for all of our guests, thank you for joining us tonight. I hope you enjoyed it as much as we did. I'm sure we could continue this for hours and hours. You can catch Dr. Lee, as I mentioned before, on Redox 5, which is every Friday evening. Denise can give you the exact link to get there. But again, thank you so much for being a part of our call tonight. We appreciate you.
Thank you for inviting me in, and I hope everyone has a wonderful evening. Thank you.